Duffy, and this is my individual performance project entitled Frank Olson as a Twist Law. May I start? Hello, my name is Frank Olson. I was one of the lead experimentalists on the CIA, or Central Intelligence Agency, Project MK Ultra. These very discreet and covert operations gave the CIA almost complete freedom to test LSD, which is a psychedelic drug, on unknowing civilians. Just after I began demanding the government take responsibility to inform their test subjects and ask for their consent, I jumped out of a building. After my peculiar death, these experiments will slowly start to unravel into the public eye, and this has created lasting effects on the government, as the CIA can no longer unknowingly test on people without their consent, and distrust within the CIA has grown. Welcome to the 1950s. Our troops just got back from winning World War II, and the industrialization of America is underway. Now, Soviet Russia and the United States, two global superpowers, are competing for influence over other countries. The nuclear missile development program and the space race were two key events from this period. This series of events was entitled the Cold War. However, there are still some things happening under the cover of the government. The CIA found little Nazi hypnosis experiments, which made the government believe that the Soviets knew how to use drugs like LSD. This ordered an instant advance in the field of so-called brain warfare. And the Cold War heavily heightened the worries of the government, causing many oversights regarding human rights and responsibilities to inform their subjects. Now, one of my colleagues, Steve Gottlieb, was about to have his moment. He reported for duty at the CIA on July 13, 1951. Gottlieb, an advanced poison expert, was immediately put onto Project Bluebird. Bluebird concluded that spiking someone's drink as an interrogation method was impossible or incredibly difficult. This is due to the varying responses from the chemical agents they used. Gottlieb showed an advanced proficiency in ignoring human rights and disregarding the responsibility to inform a subject. Then, the CIA realized something awful. Maybe, just maybe, they could turn these drug experiments into mind control. The brain-altering effects of LSD were quickly set to be tested. This rush of testing LSD also might have made the scientists go a little overboard. You see, in their quest to allegedly zap people's minds away and instill a new one, they ended up buying the entire world's supply of LSD. Alan Dulles, the director of the CIA at this time, approved MK Ultra. Dulles decried the Soviets in the way they operated, and wanted to get ahead of them if they knew how to use mind control. The first part of MK Ultra was called Operation Artichoke. Artichoke focused on behavioral modification using many of the same methods as in Bluebird. The tactics they used included electroshock therapy, hypnosis, polygraphs, and a variety of drugs, toxins, and chemicals. The second half of MK Ultra was entitled Operation Midnight Climax, and it is exactly what it sounded like. Using 4 government-issued safe houses, the CIA hired prostitutes to lure men into these buildings, and once inside, they would lace these men with LSD and sometimes other brain-altering drugs. These men were not asked to be laced or tested, chalking up to an overlook and responsibility. During the experiments, I helped until I realized what was going on. It was a military chemical corps scientist, first hired at Fort Detrick. The bioweapon developmental plan that had been going on at Detrick started in 1944, and originally we were researching how to end the war. Now, during my time researching psychedelics, after 10 years of service to Detrick, I became a senior bacteriologist. I was then chosen by the CIA to help them research in MK Ultra and other LSD. I traveled to witness many brutal things, deadly interrogations, and first-hand tests of toxins, both traumatized me. I then stupidly confided to my friend, Norman Cornier, that I was disgusted by the CIA and was determined to leave. I became a man who knew too much, and I should have known the CIA didn't want me rocking the boat anymore. November 1953, I was sent an invite to gather with some of my colleagues in Beef Creek Lake, Maryland, to discuss MK Ultra. One day, Sidney Gottlieb poured everyone a drink. He then revealed he had spiked each of us with LSD. I drank heavily that Thursday night. Strangely enough, 7 days later, I jumped out of a building in New York City. My strange and unusual death shows how my right to live was stripped away from fear of my exposing of the wrongful actions of the government. My family was worried about my death in 1975 when the Rockefeller Commission's report noted an anonymous military scientist who was laced with LSD and died in 1953. After pressing the military and CIA, my family met with President Gerald Ford to discuss my untimely demise. After a heartfelt apology, they agreed to a $750,000 settlement to never hold the government responsible for my death. In a later case, James Stanley was laced with LSD during his time on the military chemical corps base in 1958. Stanley began hallucinating, having anger issues, and impaired memory. He was then sent a request for his cooperation in a study testing the long-term effects of LSD that he previously volunteered in during his time at the base. Stanley, as we already know, was not happy about this. He then sued the government under the Federal Tort Claims Act, which basically stated any government employees who face negligence or damage during their time working for the government are entitled to compensation. However, the district court strangely disagreed with him and essentially broke his right to compensation. Now, a letter from Sydney that he did not write me during his time living, but he wanted to share with me. Dear friend, after hearing about your chance to tell the living about my many experiments, I wanted to give you and your listeners some perspective. We did not mean to infringe upon human rights or the responsibility to inform our subjects. All we really wanted to do was find out how mind control worked before the Reds beat us to it. When we first started, we were worried they knew how to use LSD and other drugs on spies, and all we wanted to do was race against them. Our intent was not to harm people, but to instead help. We were researching irresponsibly in order to prevent the Soviets from doing worse. While we now see the error in our ways, we only meant to help, and I am very sorry for spiking you. It was my intent to conduct a small experiment on my colleagues to see how LSD worked on more advanced brains such as yourselves. But thank you for letting me express my perspective on the right betraying reasoning behind our experimentation. Your friend, Sydney Gottlieb. Later, the Church Committee was established, which looked into mistakes that the government made with the CIA. It was founded mostly to look at Watergate, but also looked in part at MKUltra. So, in conclusion, the CIA almost completely got away with abusing human rights and ignoring their responsibility to inform their subjects, while, however, the Church Committee, being founded, is stopping this from ever happening again, and the punishments would also be incredibly increased to those who ignore the human rights and responsibilities of testing. Thank you.
Great job, Evan.
Thank you.
Can we ask you a few questions? And you can put that away when we're done. Okay. So let's chat first, and then you can use that as a take a breath. You're done. So I would love to know what attracted you to this topic, and particularly in kind of the first part of your paper, you say that you were interested in propaganda and invasion.
Yes.
So how does that all tie into this?
So originally, I was curious about invasions, and especially just because of the modern stuff like with Ukraine and Russia. However, I started to then delve less into like actual physical land invasions and more of how the government used propaganda to cover up and experiment and invade people's minds.
That's fantastic.
Any surprises in your research?
One of the biggest surprises to me was just how little this gets talked about in modern day. Like, I had no idea who Frank Olson was before I started my research, but now I know all about him and can do a 10-minute monologue about him.
While you were doing your research, did you find any gaps or anything that you weren't able to find?
The biggest thing I wasn't able to find was really just more about some of the people who, the afterward experiences of being tested on. I found a few like famous examples, like the person who wrote One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest actually participated in this, and also Charles Manson, which actually leads to some conspiracy theories that because of MKUltra, that led him in his cuckoo-ness.
I might have a question about your research. So in your paper, you say that you had a change of direction. You started with Gottlieb, but then shifted to Olson.
Yes.
So can you tell us about what led you to shift your focus?
Originally, I was researching from Sydney Gottlieb's perspective, but I realized that he would think, really, as you saw in the letter, that these were right because he was doing it to stop the Soviets, and he's just maybe a little overboard. But then I thought about who's a victim who wasn't exactly tested on, but actually faced consequences from these actions and would see these as wrong. And Frank Olson was prime suspect number 1.
I was curious as to your comment about him jumping out the window.
Yes.
That act, you, if I remember correctly, and correct me if I'm wrong, was based on his fear of exposing too much. Do you think that that was the only reason, or did the experimental drugs on him actually create something that would just make somebody jump out the window?
Right. There are 2 sides to this story, and so, as you said with your second half, many people believe it was the LSD that caused him to be suicidal and jump. But the LSD had been in his system for 7 days and likely would have festered out of him, and he wouldn't be under the influence anymore. And when he was first found, splatted, there was one of his colleagues was actually nearby. I believe he was in the bathroom when he actually jumped. So it has led to many theories that he was pushed actually, and they just covered it up with propaganda.
So you have an opinion about that?
Yes.
What's your opinion about that? Which theory do you
I
believe?
believe he jumped. Or not jumped, sorry. He was pushed. Pushed. Yeah. By his colleagues just to tie up loose ends and before he could expose the wrongful actions like I'm doing now.
Do you see any parallels to this experimentation versus, for example, Agent Orange in the Vietnam War, that people weren't told about the risks either? Is government continuing to do this kind of experimentation?
I believe the government is slowly ditching chemical experiments like with Agent Orange, or they're just covering it up really well, just because there's been so many consequences. All of the victims of this have spoken out, well, not all of them, but you get the idea, about why the government should be held responsible for this and not have their rights be taken away because they just wanted to do some experimenting.
So the fact that, the one thing in your presentation, you said that the United States bought up the entire world supply of LSD. Where did you find that?
When I was researching, I started with CIA documents, and I'm quite confident I found financial records of actual CIA members, and one of them was talking about buying out LSD, and I also heard it from one of the articles I used researching Midnight Climax too. Yes, all 12 ounces there was.
So what would you say, for those that are watching your presentation, what is the main takeaway, or what do you want us to learn?
I think the main takeaway is to actually research and dig up old stories that don't get told as much, because there's so many victims that have faced so many consequences for actions they did not do that should be more talked about and more known.
Did you have fun with us?
Yes, and very much fun.
Is there anything else you want us to know?
Let's see. So some of my research actually told me that the government hired Nazi scientists at one point to research fluoride, which is one of the deadliest chemicals known to man. And that was just showing how slowly the government was warming up to testing these deadly toxins.
Any thing that will impact your future from this?
Knowing just how much the CIA can cover up and how well they did cover it up just showed me how well we don't really know anything sometimes. How everyone can just be hiding up these plastic walls and just behind it can be something really dark and scary.